Right, tonight we're going to actually look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, and try and unpackage what was scripture and what has been urban legends that have come in. And it's interesting, there are a number of our carols that we love actually were not written by Christians. And so they were regularly pick up themes that are not necessarily the same ones that we would pick up on. So let's see what it starts with. So Matthew chapter 2 verse 1 says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem." So the first thing we have is a prediction. It comes from the book of Micah chapter 5 verse 2. It says, "You, O Bethlehem Ephrathah," if I got it right, "are only a small village among the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel will come from you." Of course, the ruler of Israel was originally King David. This is post-King David, but it's obviously looking forward to a future king, one whose origins are from distant past. So there's two things it's saying. First, in Bethlehem, there'll be a new king born, but this king is from origins of distant past. So there's a sense of whispering to us about Jesus' eternity in there as well. Now, any guesses? How far do you think Bethlehem is from Jerusalem? Yeah, so 6 miles, old-fashioned language, 10 kilometres, new-fashioned language. So if you think where we are here at Newport, you go down the Narrabeen, that's where Jesus is born. So it's incredibly close. And if you're a king like King Herod, it's not that hard for you to jump on a chariot or ride a horse and be there in a pretty short period of time. And then you've got to start saying, well, why did he himself not go down and check this out? And in my research, it was quite funny because one of the articles was describing the city of Bethlehem. And I'm thinking, it's not a city. It's a small village. And if you've grown up in a very, very small country town, you realise that the quickest way for a rumour to spread is to tell one person. And by the end of the week, everybody in town knows all your business. And so it's that sense of a close, committed community. And chances are there'll be only 3 or 4 families probably dominating that whole village. And so it's only a small group, maybe a couple hundred people max would have actually lived there. Some people might really stretch it to maybe 1,000, but it's most likely to have been only a couple hundred, if that. So the first thing we got is that he's born during the time of King Herod. So when's King Herod living? Now, Herod dies after a lunar eclipse, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, who lived about the same time as him. And so historians would kind of think that probably about March or April in 4 BC is when he dies. So when people say, when was Jesus born? A lot of people go between 4 and 6 BC. Some might go for 1 and 2 BC. And then you start saying, so well, why was he not born in 0 BC? Because if BC is before Christ and AD is in the year of our Lord, surely Adonai Domine, surely he should have been born in the year 0. So well, it would have been good, but the monk who worked out the calendar didn't include the year 0, so he left that out of the equation. And there were a couple other minor flaws in his thinking. So he did a good job, but he was just one man. It wasn't like there was a massive committee of archaeologists all debating what he did. And so when he put the calendar together, I don't know if he was aware of how significant his calendar was going to become. But so he's slightly out there. And so we have Jesus been born. We're not sure exactly where, and it's a great debate for people to try and work out what things could have happened to make it there. It says, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, Magi is the plural of Magus. What is a Magus? A Magus is a wise man. They came from the east, and there's 2 possibilities. Some would say, well, maybe he came from the east as in Persia, or maybe from the east, Babylon. Although I have had some people say they may have come from India. They may have come from the opposite way, as in east meaning from a different direction. But so why would these 2 places normally be picked by people, Persia and Babylon? Now the word Magi has its origins in the Iranian language. And it was actually used of a tribe of people who lived with what were called the Medes. And who are the Medes? They're famous for their knowledge of astronomy. Now, Magi had their own religious beliefs, And you've got to say, well, what did they believe in? They said, well, first of all, they believed in one God. They shared that in common with Jews and Christians. So they weren't polytheistic religious things like the Roman Empire. They believed that man's duty was to do good to other people, that was a very moral thing, and that you should shun evil. They were very famous for being people of prayer, and they had a very high regard for manual labour. The interesting thing the Magi religion did not have was sin or redemption, were not two key components of what they had. So they're really more of a moral code rather than one that dealt with sinful behaviour. Now, many early Christian writers believed that they were probably Persian because of the clothes that you'll find in many of the pictures and the discussions they'd had. And many people believe that these Persians could have been deeply influenced by the Jews who'd spread throughout the whole the world at that time there. And some people would actually say that them coming was because these people had access to the book of Isaiah. And so when strange things happen in the sky, they say, well, Isaiah prophesied some of these things. Maybe we should go and see if that prophecy from Isaiah is picked. So that's the idea behind Persian. Now, the second famous one they picked is Babylon, which is either called Babylon or Babylonians or the Chaldeans. So what's their link in the Old Testament? Daniel was in Babylon in the Old Testament. He was amongst the wise men there. No one knows which is true. Great to debate it, great to have some interest in it, but got to be very careful that we don't try and make it into a rock-solid sermon based on something which is pretty obscure. So the big question then is, were they called Melchior, Balthazar and Caspar, which is the name that's quite often given for the wise men, if I can pronounce them correctly? No. Why is the idea of three wise men? Because there are three presents. And then you start saying, well, if people were travelling a long journey, what size group would they normally go as? They'd probably go as a group of 40 or 50 people. That'd be quite a large, substantial number of people. You'd have servants, you'd have people to tend the animals. They're obviously high-profile people. And so when this group of 40 people arrives in Jerusalem, you can see why everybody took notice of them as a large group. Next question, did the star actually lead them to Bethlehem? And the answer is not really. The star they saw in the sky, now whether it meant that the star was moving and therefore they followed it as a geographical thing, or whether it was an astrology or astronomy thought that that's where they should be heading, it actually only led them to Judea. So it led them to the country. So what makes you think it was only to Judea? So in Matthew chapter 2 verse 2, they go to Jerusalem. They ask, where is the one who's to be born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. So they arrive there and say, we're here. This is who we're looking for. Do you know where he is? So it's not like they went to Bethlehem and then said, well, is there any babies here that we could worship? So now the problem with that is that them coming was not one that was seen as an evangelistic desire by Jews. In the Old Testament, Jews had always been told that they meant to be a priesthood to all the nations of the world, which is something they never really grasped. So they missed the mark of what the Old Testament was saying. They regularly saw that God's blessing was for them alone. And it's interesting, even in the early church, especially as we go through the book of Acts, we can see one of the great struggles they had was, is Jesus for Jews, or is Jesus for Jews and Gentiles? So we turn to chapter 2, verse 3 of Matthew. It says, when King Herod heard this, about the idea of these magi looking for this king to be born, it says that he is disturbed and all Jerusalem with him. So who is this Herod? Now, Herod had actually fought very hard to become the king of the Jews. He fought many major battles, using a Roman army as his method of achieving victory. And so between 40 and 37 BC, many years earlier than Jesus, he had dramatically expanded Judea and had massive battles against people who were called the Parthians. So why did the Magi then cause all this waves in Jerusalem and make the town talking? One of the issues was...
Go back to the star.
Yeah.
So So what did you say about the star not leading them? Where did you say?
Oh,
You said it just led them to
the star would have gone to Judea, but they go to Jerusalem and to Herod's court to find out where the child is to be born. So it's not like them saying, we're going to go to Bethlehem. It's a sense of them getting, like, that's why they say, we're here to worship the baby. Where is he? Now, we'll find out that the people said,
Well,
well,
how about verse 9? After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they'd seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was.
all right, well, that's where also you've got a big thing is that where were they going? They're going to go to Bethlehem because they've been told that's where to go.
So the indication from that verse, which I find hard to understand, is the star actually stopped over the very virtual house where the child was. That's what it says.
Yeah.
So
Right. In our Western mind, we've got to be careful of reading Western thinking
I'm not
into
reading
Eastern.
Western one, I'm reading what it says.
Yeah. No. You as a Western mind thinking person is reading what it says, but an Eastern mind person would not necessarily read it the same way. So we've got to be very careful that we regularly read everything through our Western culture, and that doesn't mean it's the same as how Eastern culture would see things.
It says it what stopped over the very place where the child was.
Yeah.
Now, I think Western, Eastern, Chinese, South American,
That's okay.
they'd all read it the same way. So
You can research that there. Right, Herod was not, his background is not of Jewish heritage, but he sought to link himself with the Jewish faith through the fact that his mother, although a Gentile, had become a proselyte or a Jewish convert. Now, he was a great fighter, and he was very, very quick to stop any revolutionary movement. He was also a great builder. So in Jerusalem, he'd built a theatre, a palace, an amphitheatre, and had done a massive rebuild of the temple. Now, the temple that we have in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus was being built by Zerubbabel back in 516 BC. So we're talking about a 500-year-old building. It was obviously getting pretty tired. So Herod in 19 BC starts an amazing building project of rebuilding everything. That was still being done when he died, not long before the birth of Jesus. What type of man was he? He had 10 wives, had over a dozen children. He killed one of his wife's brothers on the grounds that he was too popular with the people. In 8 BC, a couple of years before Jesus, he kills 2 of his own children on the basis they were trying to take over his throne. 5 days before his own death, he organises another son to be murdered. So you're thinking, what type of dad kills his own kids? So when we get to the part where he seeks to kill Jesus, people in Jerusalem would not have been shocked at Herod making that decision. So in chapter 2, verse 4 says, when he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. They responded, Bethlehem in Judea. They replied, for this is what the prophet has written, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who is shepherd of my people Israel. Now the priests knew exactly what was happening. The quote comes from Micah. And then in chapter 2, verse 7, when Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared, he sent to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. Now it's interesting, he trusted the Magi without sending any of his own troops or other people, which is a bit weird. So off to Bethlehem go the wise men. Herod stays in Jerusalem only about 10 kilometres away. And chapter 2, verse 9. After they heard the king, they went on their way. The star they'd seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now, you then got to say, how much does a star move on a 10k journey, which would make it harder. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So the first thing you've got to say to yourself, is he in a cave? Like there'd be some people say that he's not born in a house because there's no room in an inn. Was he in a cave? Is he in a corral? Is he in a outbuilding? Or what we really don't know. But if you look at archaeologists at that time, how they described the house was the part of the church we're in now would be maybe somebody's house. But above Phil's head there, if you put in a false floor, that would be like say 1/3 of the area. Upstairs where the family would all sleep. Downstairs is where all the goats and cattle and whatever would be there in winter for protection. And so when Mary and Joseph arrive at a house, they say, look, I'm sorry, upstairs is absolutely chockers full of people. There's no room. We've got other people who beat you to the gun. And the chance that the doors that they were knocking on were probably cousins, first, second or third cousins of their family, because they would have known people who were there. But the difficulty was there was nowhere upstairs to sleep, so they said, well, you go and sleep downstairs. At least you can have a private place by yourself rather than the clutter of all the family being around you. You're close to people, but they would have probably slept downstairs. So if the archaeologists, when they look at houses and you walk into them, that's basically what houses in Bethlehem today look like.
So can I
Yep.
just make a comment? So having been to Bethlehem and thought about this, there's a church where they say it's over the spot where it happened.
Yeah.
Which is up on a hill. It's fine, may have been there. But you go down into the fields, into the shepherd's fields,
Yeah.
and there's a cave. There's a massive cave. There's a cave that'd be half the size of this church. And I've talked to Jason, who's the Anglican minister, and he's brought out the point maybe you're making there that probably Joseph was related to half the people in Bethlehem. They probably just stayed with a relative.
Yeah.
I probably felt that the cave was the best option. Personally, I don't exactly know why, but having thought of different options. One small point is that the angels came to the shepherds, who just went and they saw, and that was the way that the angel had told them. Now, it would occur to me that if the angels appeared to shepherds, then Jesus just may have been born out in the fields, where the cave is.
Yeah.
Because the shepherds would have just had to go 100 metres down the road, and there it was, rather than into the town.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my top and spiel.
It's hard. A lot of the supposed historical locations were done hundreds of years later, where a very famous, I think it was Constantine's wife or something came, or something like that. And these people said, oh, that's where Jesus was born. So she just made all these things landmarks, but there was no archaeological link whatsoever to a number of those type of things. So you've got a number of supposed historical locations weren't all that historical.
That's true.
Yeah.
But if the angels appeared to the shepherds, and if Bethlehem was a small town, then over a few hundred years, the tradition of where it may have happened may have remained.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So I wouldn't dismiss the places that are mentioned, although what you say is true. Constantine's wife discovered pretty well everything that happened in the Bible.
Yeah.
And they became holy places, and they were just made up because that's what she thought.
Right, so next we have is that there's two dates that are based on the death of Herod. Now, we have the wise men coming. People are aware the wise men are obviously after the birth. Firstly, when Jesus is born, his parents take him to the temple, and they actually offer the poorest of all possible offerings of a couple of pigeons. And you're thinking, if they've just been given a large amount of gold by the three wise men, or the wise men I should say rather than three, why did they not use some of that gold to get him a better thing for the temple? So yeah, the sense of that they are post his dedication. So in chapter 2 verse 11, on coming to the house, so obviously Jesus is out of where he was born originally. On coming to the house, they saw a child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and they worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. Now, people make great things about why these three things are given. So gold, they'd say, there's this imagery of wealth, that gold's a precious metal, it's valuable. And if you think it through, if Mary and Joseph had to escape very quickly to Egypt, and the Bethlehem is on the road to Egypt, then that gold might have been what they used to actually finance their escape journey. What is gold a symbol of? It's a symbol of divinity and godliness. And so what were pagan idols made out of? Gold. What's the Ark of Covenant covered with? Gold. And so gold, for some people, would say this represents the Christ child's divinity. Now, frankincense is something that's used in worship. So people would say, well, that represents holiness and righteousness. Some would say, well, that represents the fact that Jesus would come as a sacrifice. Now, myrrh, also in Mark 15, myrrh is described as gall, which is the potion that was offered to Jesus on the cross. Was myrrh or gall in it. It's a spice that was used quite often in embalming. So people would say, well, that imagery for his death. It's also quite often mixed with wine, which Jesus had been offered to him. And so some people would say that the myrrh represents his bitterness, suffering, or affliction. But once more, they're loose guesses. The scripture doesn't give us that strong link. But in chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route." And so they obviously escape. We soon find out that Herod tries to kill the babies, and Jesus and his family then escape to Egypt. And so is Jesus a refugee? In some sense he is, but not like modern day refugees are. It's a different distinctive that he would have to have gone through. Did his family struggle? Probably in Egypt. They probably did, but in Egypt there were many Jews had gone there beforehand. There would have been a whole community for them to be part of, but they stay there until they know that Herod is dead. So that's a bit of background behind some of the myths and some of the things that are true and some that are false. So let's close in prayer.